Well, hello there. You're listening to Outside the Bubble, episode 36. I'm your host, Joanna Bull. How are you today? I am amazing. I'm a little bit sniffly, and right now I am very, very sweaty. I just finished a super intense workout, and I'm sitting here in my workout clothes, recording the intro of this podcast for you. And the reason that I am sharing this with you is because I'm actually really proud of the last couple of weeks of my workout. Now, I am a pretty dedicated exerciser. It's just something that I make sure I have time and space for in my life. And I've been like that for a very long time now. Exercise has always been very important to me just for, staying in shape and my health and my mental health and just like getting built up energy and sometimes even anger out. And I was getting a little bit bored with the workout that I was doing, so I knew it was time to change it up. And I am a gigantic fan of the kettlebell. And I used to do kettlebell classes, and I've worked with kettlebells for quite a while. And there's kettlebells at my gym, and I also own some kettlebells. And I recently came across something called the Kettlebell Challenge, and I decided I would do the challenge. So the Kettlebell Challenge is doing 10,000 kettlebell swings in the course of 4 weeks. So what that looks like is 500 kettlebell swings a day, 5 days a week, along with exercises in between. So it's not just kettlebell swings. And the first week I'm on week 3 now. And the first week that I did it, I decided to go slow and I built up to 500 swings throughout the week. Actually, it was the Monday of the second week. So I decided not to push myself, not to injure myself, just to go really slow. It was exhaustive and kind of painful, very difficult. I knew it would be very difficult, but it was very difficult. So the way that the swings go are you do it in repetitions of 5, and you do it in sets of 10 swings and then a rest, and then 15 swings and a rest, 25 swings, rest, 50 swings, longer rest, and then your next set. So I'm just super excited to share with all of you that this is the first workout I've done where I was able to actually finish those last 50. So I've been able to do the 10, the 15, the 25, and then sometimes I could do 50, sometimes it was 40. It really depended on how my hands were doing and my grip strength and how sweaty my palms were. But today I did 50 at the end of each set, which is super exciting. So I am sharing that with you today, and I would love to hear about what you have challenged and pushed yourself to do in the last little while that you didn't think was possible, because you are so capable of anything you set your mind to. Okay, so today's podcast, we are talking to Raising Roots Jules, and she's going to introduce herself. Today's episode is all about rediscovering your childlike self. Are you ready? Let's get this episode started. Jules, thank you so much for joining me today.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
So tell me a little bit about yourself, who you are, and what it is that you do.
Absolutely. Well, I am Jules Grieve. I go by Raising Roots Jules because in 2015, I had my first child who drastically changed my life, as most children do, and inspired me to start a business called Raising Roots. And from that message and the mission behind it, I have sought out internationally speaking and training the message of childlike growth in the adult world because of what I've learned from him and other kids that I see around everywhere and up to really high school age. And it has been the most invigorating life change experience for me in every area.
That's super exciting. Now, We're going to talk about childlike growth throughout this podcast interview. And one of the reasons that I was interested in having you on is I think being childlike is so important. And there's a lot of talk right now in just the world in general and in business and in education about being curious and what curiosity looks like and it means. And I notice students when I work with them, as they move up through the years, they're still curious, but not in the way that they are when they're kids. It just like their curiosity just kind of changes.
Mm-hmm.
So why did you begin pursuing childlike growth in the adult world? You talked about your child, but what else was going on there?
Absolutely. The story is, I'm so glad you asked. I found out I was pregnant and about to have this first child, and thought, oh my gosh, I don't even remember ever thinking about wanting kids. This is going to be insane. And I was very nervous because I had grown up from a playful child to a very cold-hearted adult. I was shunning the world and everything in it. I lived through a facade, and that facade, right underneath of it, was just envy and jealousy, selfishness, cynicism, and hatred. It was just my life. That's what I knew. And in order to get by, I was an entertainer with that facade. And it was completely fake and numb, very emotionless. And when I found out I'm going to have a new life under my wing to raise, I thought, there is no way I'm passing off this way of living to a new human. And I was petrified, terribly nervous about what was going to happen. And as soon as he's born, it's a completely foreign world to me, as to most parents, but I was just terrified the whole time. I never made eye contact with him. I barely held him. I was full of shame, wondering how in the world I was going to build a relationship with him, knowing that my biggest fear was human connection. Lo and behold, he's 6 months old. And so we're 6 months in advance now of me doing these things. I'm frantic, folding laundry, running around the house, trying to still grab my bearings as to what I was doing. And this kid is full of joy. At this moment that I want to describe to you, while I'm folding laundry, he was sitting in our bed, a queen-size bed. Just imagine this little 6-month-old human talking and jibber-jabbing and flailing his arms and legs around, having the time of his life. And he's just in his own world. But what I felt after a while was his eyes were seeking out my eyes, my attention. And it grew silent, and I realized I had to stop and just stand still for a moment. And when I looked at him, he put his arms down, his legs were still, and he's quiet. And he's staring at me, and I think that this is my cue, I guess. I've never really held a genuine conversation in, gosh, I don't know, 20 years since I was a little girl. So I told him that. I said, Zayden, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. I don't even know how to talk to you. I'm completely scared to be your mom. And I don't know where to start. I want you to know that it's important to me that any conversation we have is very real. And I've only known how to be guarded. So I don't know how to take down those walls. And as soon as I'm done saying that very truthful, for the first time in a long time, paragraph about myself and where I'm at, he lets an entire breath go in between us, just in and out. It's like that awkward silence moment before he starts gibbering and jabbing again and puts his hands up, puts it behind his head, kicking his legs out, having a good time, joking with me. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this kid never broke eye contact with me. He listened the entire time, and I actually felt heard. And I thought, it just funny. I don't remember the last time I ever took the time to make someone else feel heard. I don't have listening skills. I don't have communication skills. I I don't even remember the last time I felt that important. He made me feel important. And so I started becoming a scientist. I'm following this kid around, and then I'm listening to other kids in restaurants and at the libraries and how they're interacting. And I'm really just observing all of these characteristics and traits that they have right out of the get go, right out of the womb, that have been beaten out of me over the years by somehow, some way, even ways unknown to me. I'm talking about traits like curiosity, their not, thirst for knowledge, their joy, their unconditional love, this unwavering chance to forgive, their energy, their focus when they're in their own world, even their resilience when parents are putting them in the car, out of the car, in the high chair, out of the high chair, or taking them to classes, picking them up, and how they kind of go with it all. It's just this free flowing, fun, loving, and focused type of lifestyle that I grew extremely, I don't know how to say it. I was blessed to be seeing it unfold before my eyes, because as soon as a couple years go by, I started integrating those characteristics and traits into my adult self, and through experimentation at my job, in my pursuit for being a speaker, in my interaction with people at my church. I was just the weird person that was actually staring at you very oddly when you talked, because I was a child soaking in every bit of knowledge you were saying, trying to gain the knowledge behind your body language you were giving, just like a child does, where their ears are always listening and they seek out learning. And then I was building the results of that, and more things, or was the fact that I was building a life I've never built before, I ever even dreamed of before. Now, even my marriage is accelerating in ways that I didn't know even existed between two people. The connection there, a raw connection, communication is fully open. There's a trust that I had never known that you could have between two people before, and it's extremely authentic. And then with that work, it's just so fun. I'm always learning new ways I could be better and more excelling, because it's just fun to do that, to bring out the best version of myself and learn how to walk a little bit stronger, a little bit taller, always learning. I've even pursued my childlike passion of becoming an aviatress. My private pilot license will be soon known in our family as a major accomplishment. And it's just been a wild ride, learning and unfolding these new, more fulfilling and freeing types of living, ways of living. And from there, I'm just taking it to the streets to make sure other people know what they can learn by observing kids, and how childlike growth is so important even now.
It's amazing about like the radical transformation you've had. Did you realize before your son was born the way that you were living? Like, were you aware of that, or was it more afterwards and then in that moment?
Oh, great question. I think I realized it, no, just as soon as I was pregnant, probably the day of, I started looking around and looking inward, and seeing how many relationships I purposely burned or kept at a distance, how isolated I was, so that I didn't have to spend all that energy being fake, and in that my way of living was barely surviving, just paying the bills because I didn't like anybody or anything. And it was just making me completely numb with those negative, toxic attributes that I was carrying.
Yeah. And I definitely, like being a high school teacher, I have seen the students that are showing up in the way that you are describing, with like the hatred and the envy and the jealousy, the selfishness, the cynicism. I can't say for
Right.
sure what their emotions are, but like you see it in their physical body
Oh,
when
yeah.
when they show up. And it just really saddens me that, you know, at 14, there are kids that
Mm-hmm.
are already showing up that way and have decided through whatever has
Mm-hmm.
happened to them in their life circumstance and situation that this is how they're going to transition into adulthood. And
Yeah.
not all of them have the moment that you had, or I imagine many of them don't have that moment
Right.
where they're,
Right.
I mean, and like 14 years old, you've barely been on this planet for any time at all. And this
Mm-hmm.
is already what's going on. So give us some strategies. How are you actually pursuing this within your life?
Absolutely. Good question. Just jotting that down now because that's such a good observation about high schoolers. One of the main issues is we don't know what happens or where it comes from that helps that decision along until we really start looking inward. And that would be my first strategy, especially as well, I wanted to say as an educator, it would be so vital to live and grow as a child because you're that other major influence in those high schoolers' lives. And leading by example, you're already doing every day, and how you're pouring into those students. And when you can look inward on yourself and how to be more childlike and fun and playful and have that humor, it's hard to not absorb, those high school students. It's just contagious. And I've seen that with even my coworkers of how goofball I act, but while being responsible, and seeing it rub off on some people who just think life isn't working out the way that they thought. And so that's so funny you say that. I think I was the same way in high school. I definitely felt it for years. But as far as the strategies with me and how I've been implementing it, after observing it from children out and about, it never had to be my own. It's so nice to have more of a controlled experiment. But working in the restaurant industry, sometimes I see families come in and you can just see a child interaction with the world right there. And I'll learn a few things. And so from learning from kids, I've learned to pursue knowledge with an undying thirst. And for the adult world, that means looking at every area of my life, looking at how I'm pursuing those areas right now, and if they're the habits that are fueling me to another level, or if they're hindering me from where I could go. Is it the best version of me, which would be my childlike self? For example, my finances. I've been able to triple my income in the last 3 months just because I've dug deep into my financial records for the last 5 years and what my habits were, how I'm actually living, and how I can learn in the adult world out of an excitement and joy to become better and better with taxes, even how the question of how can I make more money instead of what can I cut back on has been that curious side. And really just making sure there's a habitual change in my attitude to look at it with a better sense of joy. Like, I'm going somewhere and doing things. This is only the beginning, and having that positive outlook.
Yeah, that's interesting when you talk about your finances, because we're so programmed through just everything that we read and people we talk to think about like, what can you cut back on instead of what else could you possibly do to create money. And it's
Right.
interesting how that subtle shift really opens up a whole other area of possibilities.
Exactly. And I wouldn't have known to be hungry for that way of thinking and living if I didn't see it in kids. For me, that's my story. And so taking that excitement to go to a class even and learn something new. Not everybody is excited to learn about the power of zero with David McKnight, or hear from Dave Ramsey just to learn how certain things could benefit your life. It's like you're always learning and just finding more and more efficient ways to be better in your financial world. And honestly, as a parent, what I'm learning now, I'm hoping to trait to Zayden at his young age too. Like, oh yeah, let's read this book about money and learn about money here. And I'm really just learning from him about how he thinks about it from the get-go. From the womb, if I mention rendering a service in order to get this money, to get this reward, or to save it for something bigger, I'm observing him as to how he interprets that, because he's the raw form of human life. And it's exciting to see him take all the ways of our society and interpret it, and then wonder, oh, so it's become normal for us. But really, there's something else there that I'm curious to find out how he's taking it in different ways he's thinking about it that I never thought of, because it wasn't natural or normal.
So I'd like you to sort of walk me through an observation. So I'm kind of thinking like, okay, I'm a classroom teacher. I have this class of students. I want to teach them to observe, let's say, kids, and to figure out how they're going to implement this into their lives for themselves. Like, what could I do? How am I going about this?
Absolutely. Yes. That's one thing I've been building in order to speak at the high schools for the same message. I would say in that scenario, and you're in your classroom and you're pouring into your students as much as you possibly can already, it would be so great to remind them of who they are as a person, that them being born, the chances of them being born scientifically is 1 in 400 trillion. And there's that thrill in that. Be like, oh my gosh, it's an honor to even be crossing paths with you. It's the chance of my life being here right now in this phase of time. Scientists have said that's 1 in 400 trillion. And then I come across you as my student. This is amazing. I can't believe that it's worked out this way. Now that it has, and I'm getting to know you as a person, I just want to say it's an honor to know what kind of influences and experiences you've walked through to form the person that you are right now. And as a child growing up in this world, I'm excited to see what choices you're going to make to formulate the person that you're going to become, because it's uniquely yours. And it's your decision to absorb certain influences and experiences and things and people, what you hear through you're using your 5 senses. Like, you're a child growing up. I'm hoping I'm coming off clear. I think I have to fine tune this a lot. But the cool thing about a teacher pouring into their student is that we're valuing each one and their growth and pouring into them. And when we re-identify how rare it is to have their life crossing paths with yours, that's exciting. And to pour into them further and say, okay, well, what kind of choices are you going to make now? you've gone through this, you've faced all of that, that you've been accomplishing these things, that you've been set back on those things, you've built up these habits. That's great. You're identifying, how they're doing in their classes, how even their grades are looking, how are you thinking right now in this phase of growth that you're in that developed that grade? Let's go over that. Why do you see it this way versus this way? And because it's exciting just to find out how you see it. And then to explore, well, if I pointed out my perspective, does it rub off on you this way? Do you get that? Does it make sense? And does it help you does it help shape you into thinking about that particular subject or area in your life in a better way? Or do you feel it hinders you? It's all your decision to become the person that you want to become. And if you don't know who that is, go back to your roots of your childlike self. You came out of the womb just having fun, and you were playful. You don't even have to, nobody remembers I don't know who I was as a kid, but I know from watching kids and seeing kids around, they're always moving. They're always excited. They're just, it's something to appreciate in the value of their exploration. And I would say, as a high school educator, to focus on building that exploration again. If they ever seem down, or even if they're not, if they're excited, it's just like, okay, what are you exploring right now? What avenues are you going to do to direct your life now? This is still your growth. You're just going through each phase of growth.
Yeah, so it's really about like honoring who they are and their voices and their experience. My wondering from that is, how do we help students understand the whole like playful and childlike aspect of it?
Right. I would say, I could probably only say from my own experience that looking at it was the standstill. So helping them see that you can just stand still, and as the major cliche out there is smell the roses.
Right.
Like, that's the whole point as you're growing in the phases of growth in this world. It gets crazy. And standing still helps you to remember how your gratitude, and that is the best attitude. That's the thing that's the attitude you have to start with. And, after honoring who they are and their voices, it would be refostering that attitude of gratitude. I mean, just like stay still, because that's how you're going to bring out your childlike joys. It'll come naturally. When you realize, I got these shoes by this way, or I was able to eat today because of these things. That's just so amazing. And even right now in front of me, somehow I have all of these papers for my Raising Roots business, and there's so much gratitude in that, like being able to have the tools I need to grow in the ways that I want to grow. And it just fosters an inner joy that strengthens who you're going to become, the morals you're going to instill, the beliefs you're going to follow. And that's exciting. As far as another avenue of life, I'll just touch on, I don't know, let's see. I was going to say forgiveness, and how great it is to identify your life as, an honor. We were talking about that statistic of your life being here. But when you see another person and you're honoring who they are from everything they've gone through, then you can forgive them for any offense, because it's a part of their phase of growth. And it's not up to you to control their world. It's only up to you to control yours, and to say, oh, well, you haven't learned that yet. And I respect that. And forgiveness is a part of communicating what you know onto another person and hearing them out as well and growing together. And that's also what children do all the time, is actually learning about another person in a way that sometimes us as adults don't take the time to do. We don't have the time to deal with that conflict. Or, we'll just brush it under the rug, or, let resentment foster, and it just builds on itself in negative ways. And having that attitude of forgiveness as well is very cool and teachable thing for the adult world if you're pursuing childlike growth.
Yeah. And I'm really glad that you touched upon that. We share some similarities in our past selves. So like the hatred and the jealousy, selfishness. And for me personally, it was looking at like how I was letting things that I perceived to be things that people had done to me hold me back. And I wasn't forgiving of those, but it was like showing up just as, anger in my everyday life. And I was allowing that to happen, where you're right. When you look at kids, especially like little kids, they like have an argument over a toy or over something. And, maybe there's some physical contact and then it's over.
Right.
And they just move on. Like they're so quick to forgive each other and to not remember. Whereas adults, we like hold on often to like the slightest thing that happened so long ago. And then you just build it into more.
Right. And it's sad, because even in my own marriage, it was building, oh man, on top, it was just 1,000 times unfolding into this resentment, and there was no communication there because I was too mad, and it's really unfair, because it's more exciting to acknowledge the phase of growth that I'm in, to take it that way, and to acknowledge the threshold of my frustration and patience. And I could say, I wonder why I responded and reacted that way. I wonder if I really soul searched as a child, and how would they interact differently by forgiving quickly. If I could expand the threshold of my frustration by finding the root as to what caused me to get frustrated so fast, and instead be grateful that that person, I crossed paths with that person, they're in that phase of growth right now, and little do they know that would just really cause a rift in our relationship. And I'm sure the reality is that's not what was originally intended. As children, when a child hurts another child, it's like, that's part of learning. Oh, I realize that's your bubble, or that's what pushes your button. And that's just a part of the learning. And for us, it's like, I can't believe you think like that, or you don't know that by now. I can't believe that's who you choose to be. And that's it. Like judge, judge, judge. But when we appreciate and find gratitude for their life and what they've gone through to formulate that person, who they are and how they're thinking, it's like, okay, my frustration threshold could be expanded. I could have more patience, and acknowledging that with a level of excitement and say, hey, shake your hand. Nice to meet you. I'm glad we crossed paths. So I could learn that about myself. And, that really, the communication is that didn't rub me the right way. It didn't sit right at all. And here's why. And the cool part is the excitement of them taking it, whether they listen to you or not. Their subconscious mind is going to take something with them for the rest of their lives because you did that. If it's just one sentence in their if you never cross paths again, in their next encounter with a similar situation, and that tends to happen a lot, it'll be different because you pursue childlike growth to communicate it in a better way and be like, thank you. I learned something about myself, and I really respect where you're coming from because of you as a human life. And we're just going to carry on. All right.
Yeah, it's a really giant component because this conversation is about, education and educators, but really like we have to do the work on ourselves first before we can show up as that type of person in our classroom and be able to bring our students into that environment.
Oh, yeah. And that's everything, creating that environment, the atmosphere that's welcoming and warm and really confident enough for them to pursue their education. Yeah, I know as a high schooler myself, I didn't learn as much as I could because I was just too distracted with things happening outside of school, in the home. And I was always using defense mechanisms, always felt attacked in some way. And I never opened up my mind to actually learning what was being put in front of me because I was too wrapped up. And when I walk into an atmosphere that's warm and welcoming, led by an example of having fun and appreciating who you are, the voice you have, the life you're living, the specific path you're on, and it's from an educator that is just having the time of her life in her job, that's more approachable. To pursue those questions, even if I never talked about my house life at all, I would feel as though this was an even more safe space where I could approach them about how to get better grades or how I could be more efficient in my learning strategies, really just absorbing that knowledge because that educator made it a point to look inward as well on themselves. And it would make me go home and think, man, how is she living that way? How is she so positive? What happened in her life? She's just lucky, and it would lead to those questions of, I'm just wondering, how you're so happy. And, those questions, I don't mean to boast or brag at all, but they pop up all the time because I'm a kid in the adult world, and it's fun to be like, oh, what do you mean? What reason is there not to be fun and funny and mess around and goof off? And if when you welcome that question and they tell you why, and you're open to listening to them because you're being a kid, you're anxious to hear who they are as a person and what's going on, and then they feel heard, it's like you've just unlocked this amazing part of their heart. And it's cool to do that as an educator, I'm sure, because it's going to be an adult. This is a person that's going to be an adult in our world before we know it. And to see them 10 years later, I know I run into my teachers all the time, to see where your influence helped foster them. And that would just be awesome if they were doing so much better because of your influence instead.
Now, different types of kids gravitate towards different types of teachers for sure.
Right.
I'm sure all teachers feel like they are creating this type of environment for students.
Absolutely.
Like, even when I was not super fun, I always thought that my classroom was warm. I'm sure there are loads of kids that would say it wasn't. But how would a person know if they're not actually creating that kind of space? Are there any kind of indicators you've seen with people that might be a bit of a light bulb for someone to say like, oh, I thought I was being warm and inviting and approaching things from curiosity, but maybe I'm actually not?
Oh, yeah. That's a difficult question for sure, because you've got to value your growth, your own growth, and how things kind of unfold to us at the exact time that they're supposed to. So the way that you're doing it, awesome. Like, you're doing it. And if if there's an indicator out there, it'll come, and that's how we get better and better. And I think that's so great. It's just a part of the growth. I can attest to that myself, because especially as a parent, I'm like, oh my gosh, I thought that was the right decision. Little did I know I was tainting my child the wrong way. But not saying that's what they're doing, but it's funny to think, I remember certain high school educators would be my go-to teacher. And there is a highlight in that, because if you're not, there's a student that's not gravitating toward you, it's almost like saying, whatever, because there's somebody else that is. And as long as you're being the best version of you at the time of your phase of growth that you're in, then that's celebratory, because you're just putting your best foot forward. And as you learn to become better and better by like a song that you hear or a book that you read or even this podcast, that's it. That's a part of the growth. And there's somebody else that's influencing them. And that's the best release for you I would hope as an educator, is that I'm doing the best that I humanly can. And I hope somebody else is doing that as well. And different types of students are going to gravitate to whoever they relate to. I know when I was in high school, I probably would not, there were some students that would not gravitate towards a fun, uppity, bubbly classroom. Oh my gosh, it would be just like, this is insane. I can't stand any more time in here type of thing. And I can relate to that. And there's certain days where that's the case even for the bubbly teacher. And that's the fun part, is identifying the appreciation in your human life as you grow. This is not like an even keel life. We were given emotions, and we should just ride it out, because when we have a negative day and we still are giving our best foot forward, and it's just not like we were the day prior, good. Now we know. Take note of that. Figure out what kind of thoughts you were thinking. Pay attention to what you're paying attention to. And and you're just excited because of your growth. And you just hope for the best for those that you're pouring into all around you all the time, even in the grocery store. And honestly, as far as identifying any other tendencies or characteristics or traits of ways that you're not pouring into someone, it's just when your heart is sitting on the characteristics we noted before: hatred, envy, jealousy, selfishness, and cynicism. When your thoughts are there, your heart is there. That's if it's there at all in the day. It's like, okay, I'm looking at that in a different way than I could be as the best version of myself as a child, because I don't see those in children, especially young children, and that's where my business derives. So I'm always thinking, why am I thinking like that? And that helps me to grow, because if I stay in that state, you can guarantee that I'm not going to be growing at all. I'm not going to be taking note of how I can be better. I'm only going to be focusing on those emotions and the thoughts that are tied to them. And therefore, I'm not pouring into anybody except for giving them the example of that it's okay to live that way. And that actually just sucks.
Yeah, definitely. I can attest to that for sure. And you can with your life experience as well. Like, living in that kind of negative emotion and energy really does suck.
Yeah. Especially when it becomes normal and you're like, oh, I've been here for just too long. Can't do that anymore. I'm going nowhere.
Yeah. And a couple of things that you've said that I just want to highlight for everyone that are super important is you've talked a lot about like doing the work on yourself, which is difficult because people often want like very specific doing the work strategies. And there are some that exist out in the world. But it's also, when I was in that place, I found that I often went to blaming the circumstances or blaming things outside and not actually trying to change myself.
Right.
As I was hearing you talk, I think that would be an indicator for me now, like knowing what I know now. If I start to blame other things, then I know that I'm not approaching it from a childlike way.
That is such a good point. I'm even jotting that down. I'm learning from you right now. I'm like, oh, yeah.
I heard you write that down.
I just love that, because those are major indicators that you're sitting in a boat has no wind whatsoever.
Well, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today. Where can people find out more about you?
Of course, my personal Facebook page is under Raising Roots Jules. And the website for the business is under raisingroots.biz. Of course, I'm also on every social media under Raising Roots. The Facebook page for Raising Roots is pretty exciting. You could follow our family there. And we sponsor a Living Full Out Facebook group. It's internationally expanding because we're making friends with people all over the world as if you're a child.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I'll get all that info from you and link it up in the show notes. So thank you very much for sharing your story and your experience with us today. We definitely appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you for your time, Joanna.
Well, there you have it. Now, since this interview, I have been exploring my childlike self for a couple of weeks now. I recorded this episode a little while ago and just sharing it with you now. So I have definitely been exploring my curiosity, thirst for knowledge, practicing unconditional love, joy, really trying the unwavering chance to forgive. That one's difficult as an adult for sure. Definitely something I need more practice with. I've been practicing my energy and my focus. And after you've had a chance to listen to this episode, if you decide to give any of this a try, I would love to hear what you think. You can hop on over to Instagram and find me at Outside the Bubble Podcast, or on Twitter, although I seem to be hanging out there less and less every day. But I am at Idea Smashing. Can you hear that scratching noise? That is my puppy dog Rascal desperately trying to get into the room. I think he's telling me that it's time for his evening cuddles. So that is all for now. Thanks so much for hanging out with me today, and I'll see you next time.